The room was packed, buzzing with 1,000 different sounds. Clinking armor, boots shifting on the polished floor, the soft humming of translator devices patching dozens of alien languages into one feed. It was the final briefing before the assault on Carthus Prime, a mission so dangerous that even the seasoned warriors looked uneasy. Everyone was talking. Everyone but the human. He sat there at the end of the row, a slim, unremarkable figure in battered field armor, his hands folded neatly on the table, his face blank. No fidgeting, no anxious chatter. Just stillness. Commander Vekthar noticed him right away. As the leader of the Zirket battle order, Vekthar had fought alongside dozens of species, including humans. He had seen them boast, brag, crack jokes before battle, even cry openly. But this one, he was too still, too quiet. That was the first red flag. "Attention!" barked the adjutant, a grizzled Garthan who had scars carved deep into his bark-like skin. The room snapped to attention, except for the human, who just slowly lifted his eyes to meet the commander's gaze like he was studying him, measuring. Vekthar fought the urge to shudder. The mission outline was standard enough. Infiltration under cover of darkness, neutralize the planetary shield generators, then call in the bombardment. Simple on paper. Suicide in practice. The Carthians were not just fierce. They were brutal, fanatical fighters. They would die to the last soldier before surrendering an inch of ground. As the maps and holograms floated in the air, showing the enemy's bunkers, turrets, and hidden artillery nests. The human said nothing. He didn't raise a hand when others asked questions. He didn't object when a risky insertion plan was proposed. He didn't even blink when casualties were mentioned, numbers thrown around like spilled drink on a tavern floor. Vekthar found his eyes drifting back to the human again and again. It wasn't like he looked threatening. His armor was mismatched. His face was young, barely scarred. His record said, Private First Class. Nothing special, no commendations, no warnings. Just average. But something was off. Something wrong. When the briefing ended, the troops filed out, already muttering among themselves. Plans were being whispered, last letters recorded, goodbyes said in the subtle ways soldiers do before a grim mission. Vekthar found himself trailing the human, who walked alone through the hallway, not falling into any squad groupings, not joking with friends. He was alone, a ghost among the living. Vekthar decided to act. He stepped in front of him, a towering wall of armored muscle. "Name," he demanded. The human looked up slowly. His eyes were dark, not with anger, not with fear, with calculation. "Matthew Cole," he said simply. His voice was quiet, calm. "Matthew Cole," Vekthar repeated, as if tasting the name. "Why are you here, human?" Matthew's head tilted slightly, almost like he found the question amusing. "Same reason as everyone else. Orders." "And if I ordered you to retreat?" Vekthar pressed, studying him. Matthew's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I don't retreat." The words hung in the air like a silent bomb. Vekthar stepped aside, letting the human pass. His instincts were screaming now, the old primal warning every good commander learned to trust. This human wasn't quiet because he was scared. He was quiet because he was ready. And something told Vekthar that when the real fighting started, Matthew Cole wouldn't just survive. He would change everything. The first red flag had been raised. And if the commander had been wise, he would have called the whole damn mission off right then and there. But he wasn't wise. Not yet. The dropship rattled violently as it tore through Carthus Prime's upper atmosphere, shaking so hard it felt like the bolts would pop loose and the whole thing would split apart. Soldiers around Matthew gripped their harnesses tightly, knuckles white, jaws clenched in silent prayers to gods from a dozen different worlds. Matthew just sat there, silent and still, his hands resting loosely on his thighs. His eyes were closed, but he wasn't sleeping. Vekthar watched him from across the cramped bay, trying to understand what he was looking at. Every other soldier was wired tight, sweat dripping down faces, adrenaline spiking into the stale, recycled air. But Matthew Cole, he was a storm bottled up inside human skin. The droplight turned red. 2 minutes to surface. "Remember your squads! Remember your rally points!" barked the sergeant, a gruff Drellic with 4 arms who could snap a Carthian's neck like a twig. "Stick to your sectors. Watch for heavy fire at the LZ, the usual barking, the usual last-minute courage pumping." The soldiers roared back in unison, all but Matthew. He just opened his eyes slowly, like he already knew how this was going to go. 1 minute. The side hatches hissed open, exposing them to the roaring night. Winds howled. Anti-air fire stitched red trails through the black clouds. Ground explosions bloomed in the distance like sick flowers. Matthew moved with the others, slipping out into the chaos, feet hitting the ground so lightly you'd barely hear a sound. The landing was chaos from the start. Tracer rounds tore through the night. Artillery slammed into the rocky ground, sending shards of stone slicing through the air. Soldiers scattered, ducking for cover, forming fire teams, laying down return fire. Vekthar hit the dirt behind a ridge and started barking orders through his comms. Squad Delta was already down. Squad Echo was pinned near the shield bunker. Squad Alpha was— "Sir!" a voice gasped in his earpiece. "It's the human!" Vekthar's head snapped around, scanning the battlefield. There, moving through the chaos like it was nothing. Matthew wasn't ducking. He wasn't diving for cover. He walked, fast and steady, straight toward the shield generator, rifle loose in one hand. Bullets whipped past him, explosions rocked the ground around him, but he never broke stride. A Carthian squad spotted him, howling their war cries, opening up with plasma cannons. Matthew didn't even flinch. He dropped into a sprint at the last second, weaving through the incoming fire like he could see the bullets before they were even fired. He closed the distance so fast that the Carthians barely had time to react. The first one died with a single shot to the faceplate. The second didn't even get to scream before Matthew's blade— where had he gotten a blade— flashed out and slit its throat. The third tried to turn, tried to run. Matthew shot him in the back of the knee, walked up calmly, and finished him with a quiet stab. The whole encounter took maybe 10 seconds. Vekthar felt his stomach twist. This wasn't standard human fighting. This wasn't even elite commando tactics. This was something else, something older, something colder. Matthew didn't slow. He pushed onward, weaving through enemy lines, using chaos as his shield. Every movement was efficient, precise, almost lazy in its ease. "Who the hell is that?" one of the Garthan lieutenants whispered in awe. Vekthar didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down, a chilling thought was forming in his mind, one he didn't want to believe, but couldn't ignore. They hadn't brought a soldier with them to Carthus Prime. They had unleashed a weapon, and now there would be no controlling it. The shield bunker loomed ahead, a squat fortress of steel and stone, bristling with turrets and lined with thick, reinforced walls that had already turned back 3 full assaults in the past week. It was supposed to be impenetrable. It wasn't ready for Matthew Cole. He slipped between patrols like a shadow, crouching behind a shattered vehicle just long enough to swap out his magazine with calm, mechanical hands. From the ridge, Vekthar and his command team watched through magnifiers, helpless to intervene, too stunned to even move. Matthew wasn't acting like a man following orders. He was hunting. 2 Carthian guards spotted him and moved to intercept, their heavy plasma rifles raised. Matthew didn't retreat. He didn't even duck. He just shifted sideways, quick and smooth, letting their shots slam into the burned-out tank beside him. Before they could adjust their aim, he returned fire, 2 quick pops, center mass, and both dropped without a sound. The human kept moving. Faster now. Closer. Inside the command feed, the comms were chaos. "Need backup. They're everywhere. Squad Echo is down. Repeat, Echo is plasma barrage incoming. Shields can't take much more." But Vekthar barely heard any of it. His entire focus was locked on that single figure moving through the darkness. And then he saw it. Matthew reached the outer perimeter of the shield bunker, and he didn't hesitate. He didn't radio for backup. He didn't wait for the squads to catch up. He just pulled a small device from his belt, something cobbled together, ugly and homemade, and slapped it onto the access panel. Vekthar's eyes widened. "No," he started to say, but it was too late. A muted pop and a ripple of distortion shot out from the device. The magnetic locks on the bunker door sparked and died. Matthew pushed the door open and slipped inside. Alone. "Commander, should we pursue?" barked his lieutenant, snapping Vekthar out of his trance. He hesitated, and that hesitation cost them, because inside the bunker, all hell was breaking loose. Gunfire echoed out into the night. Screams followed, not battle cries, not defiant shouts, screams of fear. Vekthar swallowed hard. His warriors were some of the bravest in the galaxy. They had seen horrors that broke lesser beings. But the sounds coming from that bunker made even the grizzled veterans flinch. "Squads Delta and Beta, move in!" Vekthar barked finally. "Secure the entrance, now!" They surged forward, crashing through the broken gate in tight formations. Vekthar followed, his pulse hammering against his temples. The inside of the bunker was a slaughterhouse. Bodies were everywhere. Carthian soldiers shredded by gunfire, crushed against walls, slumped over consoles. It wasn't messy. It wasn't wild. It was surgical. Each kill was clean, efficient, placed with terrifying precision. And standing at the center of it all, calmly removing a spent magazine and reloading his rifle with a smooth, practiced motion, was Matthew Cole. Blood splattered his armor. His eyes were flat, emotionless. Vekthar finally understood. Matthew hadn't come here to fight. He had come here to end. The human looked up as Vekthar approached, as casual as if they were meeting in a market. He nodded once, almost politely. "Shield controls are over there," he said, his voice quiet, almost bored. "You might want to hurry. Reinforcements will be here soon." Then, without waiting for orders, without waiting for thanks, Matthew turned and disappeared deeper into the bunker, moving like a man who still had unfinished business. Vekthar stood there, surrounded by death, realizing the second red flag had been raised. Not only had they unleashed a weapon, they had unleashed something that didn't care who lived or died, only that the mission was completed. And Vekthar, for the first time in years, felt something cold curl deep in his gut. Fear. The shield collapsed with a low, grinding hum, sending a pulse of distorted energy rippling across the battlefield. Every soldier, every weapon, every living thing fighting on the blackened plains of Carthus Prime saw it. The massive blue dome that had protected the enemy's fortress blinked once, then vanished. A heartbeat later, the orbital cannons fired. Brilliant lances of light tore through the sky, slamming into the exposed Carthian defenses. The ground shook violently, the air itself burning under the raw force unleashed. Entire battalions of enemy troops were vaporized where they stood. Vekthar watched from the ridge, a surge of grim satisfaction flooding through him. This was the turning point. They could finally break the Carthians, end this brutal campaign. But he couldn't celebrate. not with the image of Matthew Cole burned into his mind, moving through the bunker like death itself, cold and unstoppable. The comms crackled back to life, frantic voices flooding in. "Command! Shields are down! Push forward! All units, assault the fortress now! We owe that ghost in the bunker a damn medal!" Vekthar cut the comms with a sharp jab of his clawed finger. He didn't need distractions. He needed to find the human. Inside the bunker, the team secured the shield control room easily. There was almost no resistance left. Matthew had seen to that. The squad leaders muttered among themselves, a strange mix of awe and unease thick in the air. "Where's the human?" barked Vekthar. One of his lieutenants pointed down a corridor, his face pale beneath his armored helm. "Deeper into the command sector, sir. Alone." Without another word, Vekthar followed. The deeper he went, the worse the carnage became. Carthian officers, elite warriors trained for decades, lay sprawled in pools of blood, most killed before they could even raise their weapons. Security doors ripped open, codes bypassed or outright smashed through. It was impossible. No single soldier, human or otherwise, should have been able to do this alone. And yet here they were. At the end of the corridor, Vekthar found him. Matthew stood before a massive reinforced door, one hand pressed lightly against it. His rifle was slung over his back. In his free hand, he held a different weapon, something strange and brutal-looking, with sharp teeth along the barrel like it was half gun, half blade. The door was locked tight, heavy enough to stop a small army. Matthew didn't seem worried. He turned slightly as Vekthar approached, his expression calm, almost thoughtful. "They're inside," Matthew said quietly. "Commanders, high-ranking ones, the ones responsible for this mess." Vekthar grunted. "We can breach it together. Bring the squads." Matthew shook his head once. "No," he said. "They're mine." Vekthar opened his mouth to protest, but the words stuck in his throat. There was something in Matthew's voice, something final. Before he could argue, Matthew placed a second, small device against the door. It beeped once, and then the door exploded inward with a roar. Matthew moved immediately, slipping through the smoke and debris like a ghost. Vekthar started to follow, but a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. One of his sergeants, a battle-hardened warrior who looked terrified. "Sir," the sergeant rasped, voice shaking. "Let him finish it." Vekthar froze, torn between command instincts and the raw terror he saw mirrored in his soldier's eyes. Inside, through the broken doorway, came the sounds of final judgment. Gunfire, screams, the wet thud of bodies hitting the floor. Matthew Cole wasn't just killing the enemy commanders. He was punishing them. It felt wrong to listen. Wrong to witness it. Like watching something sacred and profane all at once. Minutes later, the noise stopped. The smoke cleared. And Matthew stepped out. Blood splattered across his armor, his weapon dripping red. His face was still calm. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The mission was over. The enemy leadership was dead. The battle for Carthus Prime was effectively finished. And all it had cost was whatever tiny, fragile piece of humanity Matthew Cole might have had left inside him. If he ever had it to begin with. Vekthar stared at him, a cold certainty settling in his bones. This war might be won, but something far, far worse had been unleashed into the galaxy. The celebration started before the last Carthian bunker was even cold. Across the battlefield, soldiers cheered, clapped each other on the back, and fired their weapons into the sky in wild, reckless joy. Carthus Prime had fallen. For many, it was the end of a nightmare. The Carthians had fought like demons, and their defeat marked a major turning point in the war. A hard-won, bloody victory. For Vekthar, it felt hollow. He watched the festivities from the ridge, arms folded tightly across his chest, his mind not on the roaring fires or the drunken songs echoing through the night. His mind was on the human, standing apart from it all. Matthew Cole stood alone at the edge of the field, his armor still blood-stained, his weapon still slung over his back. Soldiers passed him without speaking, their cheers growing quieter when they neared him, as if his presence pulled the joy right out of the air. He didn't seem to notice or care. "Commander," a voice said at his side. Vekthar turned to see Lieutenant Jarek, his second-in-command, looking grim. "Orders from High Command. The human is to be brought back immediately for debrief and commendation." Vekthar snorted. "Commendation?" he growled, voice low. "For what? For turning this battlefield into a graveyard?" Jarek shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. There was nothing he could say. Vekthar let out a breath that felt heavy enough to crush him. He had fought for decades, seen horrors that would drive others to madness. He knew what war demanded. But what he had seen today wasn't war. It was something older, something worse. A quiet, ruthless annihilation. He pushed away from the ridge and made his way down toward Matthew. Soldiers parted before him like grass in a storm. No one wanted to get too close to either of them. Matthew didn't move when Vekthar approached. He just stared out into the blackened horizon, where the last fires of Karthus Prime still burned. "You're being recalled," Vekthar said gruffly. "High Command wants you back at Central." Matthew didn't answer right away. He didn't even look at him. Finally, he said, voice almost too soft to hear. "Am I being rewarded?" Vekthar frowned. "You ended the campaign. You're a hero to them." Matthew's lips twisted into something that could have been a smile, or maybe it was just a grimace. "Heroes," he repeated quietly, like it was a joke only he understood. Vekthar felt the old instinct again, the one he had ignored back during the briefing. The first red flag. And now here it was again, waving bigger and bloodier than ever. Matthew turned finally, his dark eyes locking onto Vekthar's. There was no pride in them, no triumph, just an exhausted, hollow certainty. "Next time," Matthew said, "it won't be the enemy I'm sent to kill." The words hit Vekthar like a hammer to the chest. Before he could respond, Matthew walked away, heading toward the transport ships gathering for departure. His figure disappeared into the smoke and dust, swallowed by the very war he had helped end. Vekthar stood there long after he was gone, the celebrations raging hollowly around him. He thought of the Carthians, who had fought with such desperation. He thought of the slaughter in the bunker. He thought of the look in Matthew Cole's eyes, the look of a man who had seen too much, done too much, and knew he would never come back from it. And he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Today, they had won a battle. But somewhere down the line, they would pay for unleashing Matthew Cole. They all would. The journey back to Central Command was a silent one. The transport ship was packed with soldiers from a dozen different races, all crammed into tight rows, armor scratched and dirty, weapons piled between them. Normally, after a victory, the ship would be filled with noise, boasts about kills, exaggerated stories of bravery, plans for celebrations to come. This time, it was different. Everyone sat stiff and quiet, casting occasional nervous glances toward the back of the ship where Matthew Cole sat alone, still wearing his blood-stained armor, helmet resting loosely on his lap. No one dared to sit near him. No one spoke his name. It was as if an invisible wall surrounded him, thick and heavy, making the air colder the closer you got. Vekthar sat near the front, pretending to review tactical data on his wrist pad, but really just thinking. Turning over every moment since the briefing, since the moment Matthew had sat there so still, so quiet. The first red flag. The first warning he hadn't listened to. Now it was too late. The ship jolted slightly as it entered the hangar bay of Central Command, the metal walls reverberating with the low hum of docking clamps. Lights switched from red to green. The doors hissed open. Officers were waiting. Rows of them, uniforms pressed, badges gleaming, expressions cool and polished. The kind of officers who never saw the blood, who only read about it on sterile reports far from the real fighting. Vekthar recognized General Solrin immediately, a tall, thin Qatari with sharp golden eyes and a smile like a scalpel. "Commander Vekthar," Solrin said smoothly as Vekthar stepped down. "Excellent work. The operation was a total success." Vekthar gave a curt nod, his eyes flicking back toward the ship as Matthew Cole emerged behind him, slow and measured. The temperature in the hangar seemed to drop again. The officers' polished smiles faltered, just slightly. Instincts older than politics and protocol warning them that something was wrong. Very wrong. Solrin recovered first. "We've prepared a full debrief for Private Cole," he said, gesturing toward a side door guarded by armed escorts. "Standard procedure for heroes of the campaign, of course." Vekthar suppressed the bitter laugh that rose in his throat. Heroes. He said nothing as Matthew was led away. The human didn't resist. He just walked where they pointed, as calm and silent as ever. Solrin clapped Vekthar lightly on the shoulder, like a man congratulating a hunting dog for bringing back a prize. "You'll be honored in tomorrow's ceremony," the general said. "Public morale is vital right now. This victory will echo across the sectors." Vekthar nodded once, stiffly. He had no intention of attending any damn ceremony. His mind was already racing ahead. Matthew Cole wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a weapon. And weapons, when left unchecked, tend to go off in the wrong hands. The interrogation room was a glass cage, bright, sterile, empty, except for a steel table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. Matthew sat in one chair, relaxed, almost bored, while a trio of intelligence officers circled him like vultures waiting for a corpse to stop twitching. They asked the usual questions. How did he breach the bunker? What tactics had he used? Had he coordinated with any irregular units? Matthew answered them all in the same quiet, even voice. Facts, figures, nothing more. No embellishments, no bragging. It wasn't enough. They wanted more. They wanted to know how he could move the way he did, kill the way he did, fight like he had already seen the battle 1,000 times before it even began. They pushed harder. Their questions turned sharp, edged with suspicion. Had he received unauthorized augmentations? Was he hiding cybernetic modifications? Was he using forbidden enhancements? Matthew just smiled, that same cold, hollow smile, and said nothing. Eventually, the interrogators left, frustrated, muttering into their comms. Matthew sat alone, waiting. Behind a tinted window high above the room, General Solrin and a cluster of black-cloaked officials watched. "He's dangerous," one of them said, voice low and tight. "If he can't be controlled, he will be controlled," Solrin interrupted sharply. "We can't afford loose ends, not now." Another official leaned forward. "What do you propose?" Solrin's golden eyes gleamed. "We'll reassign him to special operations, black missions, deep strikes, the kind where no one asks questions if things get messy." "And if he refuses?" Solrin smiled thinly. "Then we make sure he doesn't have a choice." The others nodded grimly. In the bright cage below, Matthew Cole sat still, his fingers idly tapping a slow, steady rhythm against the steel table. It wasn't impatience. It was a warning A reminder that no matter how much they planned, no matter how clever they thought they were, they had already made the biggest mistake of their lives. They thought they could use him, control him, chain him. But Matthew Cole wasn't a tool. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a storm. And when they finally realized it, it would already be too late. They moved fast after the debrief. Orders were processed, assignments reshuffled, and within hours, Matthew Cole's fate was decided behind closed doors. He would be transferred to Special Operations Group 7, an outfit so secret it officially didn't even exist. Black Ops, kill teams, missions where deniability wasn't a luxury, it was the whole point. Matthew never spoke during the handover. He signed the documents they shoved in front of him, nodded when told where to go, and followed orders like a man clocking into an ordinary job. But Vekthar wasn't fooled. He watched from the observation deck as Matthew was escorted down the narrow corridor toward his new unit. Soldiers flanked him like guards leading a prisoner, rifles held just a little too tightly in nervous hands. Not because they thought he would run, but because they feared what would happen if he decided not to keep walking. The walls of the Special Operations Wing were sterile, windowless, and lined with cameras that tracked every movement. It was a cage, no matter how polished it looked. Matthew didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. The door to his assigned quarters hissed open. A small, bare room with a cot, a metal desk, and a locker for his gear. That was it. No decorations, no comforts. Home for now. He stepped inside without hesitation. The guards closed the door behind him, and the magnetic locks clicked into place. Vekthar turned away from the glass, a sick feeling churning in his gut. This wasn't a promotion. It was containment. High Command didn't want to honor Matthew Cole. They wanted to bury him, deep inside missions no one else dared take, where failure or death would be inevitable. Or at least, that was their plan. Vekthar knew better. If they thought they could control the storm, they were fools. And storms had a way of turning on those who tried to cage them. The first mission came barely 24 hours later. A distress beacon from an abandoned research station on the Outer Rim. Supposedly a simple retrieval operation. Get in, secure the data, get out. Simple. Except Vekthar saw the red flags immediately. The station was deep inside uncharted space. No backup available, no quick extraction. And the distress signal? It had been triggered after the station had been officially listed as decommissioned. A trap. Obvious. They were sending Matthew in alone. No team. No overwatch. No support. It was a setup designed to fail. Vekthar clenched his fists as he watched the mission briefing scroll across his terminal. It was a death sentence. A clean way to erase a problem without the blood showing up on anyone's hands. And Matthew had accepted it without a word. The insertion shuttle was small, unmarked, automated. No pilot, no crew. Just Matthew Cole and the cold silence of deep space. As the shuttle cut through the void, he sat still, helmet in his lap, eyes closed. He wasn't praying. He wasn't thinking about tactics or survival odds. He was remembering. Karthus Prime. The look in Vekthar's eyes, the quiet, hollow feeling that had taken root inside him and refused to leave. He had been a soldier once, a man once. He wasn't sure what he was now. But he knew one thing. He would not die for their convenience. He would not be erased like a mistake no one wanted to admit making. The station appeared ahead, a broken husk of twisted metal spinning slowly in the darkness. Power flickered weakly inside, like a dying heartbeat. Matthew stood, locking his helmet into place, sealing the suit with a hiss of pressure. No ceremony, no final words, just movement. Action. Because at the end of everything, action was all he had left. The shuttle docked with a heavy clang. The airlock cycled open. Matthew stepped inside the station. It was worse than he expected. The halls were wrecked, bulkheads torn apart by something powerful and furious. Blood smeared the walls in wild, frantic patterns. Claw marks gouged deep into the steel floors. No bodies, just the blood. Matthew moved carefully, weapon up, senses razor sharp. Every step echoed too loudly in the dead station. Every flicker of broken light seemed to stretch the shadows longer, deeper. He reached the mainframe room. The data cores were intact, still blinking weakly. He moved to extract them, and stopped. Something moved in the corner of his eye. Not an accident, not a system glitch, movement. Matthew turned, slow and deliberate, scanning the darkness. Then he saw them. Figures. Half a dozen, maybe more. Twisted things that might have once been human but weren't anymore. Gray, wet flesh stretched too tight over long, hungry limbs. Faces frozen in a snarl of rage and agony. Bioexperiments, failed ones, forgotten projects left to rot, or left as another trap. Matthew didn't flinch. He just raised his rifle and moved into them like he had on Carthus Prime. Cold, efficient, unstoppable. Because whether it was Carthians, politics, or monsters stitched together in the dark, it didn't matter. Matthew Cole wasn't here to survive. He was here to end it. And this time, he wasn't going to stop. Not until every last one of them, enemy, master, monster, was dust. The first of the creatures lunged, a blur of claws and teeth, moving faster than any human body should have allowed. Matthew shifted his weight, stepped inside its reach, and drove his blade up into its chest with one fluid motion. The creature spasmed violently, shrieked a high, wet sound, and dropped. The others didn't hesitate. They swarmed him, a tide of twisted flesh and madness, each more desperate and furious than the last. Matthew didn't give them the chance to overwhelm him. He moved like a machine built for one purpose: strike, step, shoot, pivot, strike again. Every movement was precise, brutal, efficient. The narrow corridor worked in his favor. They couldn't surround him. They came one by one, and he cut them down just as fast. The floor became slick with blood, and whatever black, oozing fluid ran through the creature's veins. The air was thick with the coppery stink of violence. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was hours. Time lost all meaning inside that spinning, broken station. Finally, the last creature collapsed at his feet, twitching once before going still. Matthew stood alone in the silence, breathing hard but steady, the blood cooling quickly in the freezing air. He lowered his rifle. Not because the danger was over, but because this was never just about surviving the monsters. It was about what came next. He made his way back to the mainframe, steps echoing in the deathly stillness. The data cores glowed weakly. He knelt, working quickly, extracting the drives, sealing them into his armored pack. Information was power, and whatever secrets this station held, Command wanted them badly enough to send him here alone. They would expect him to return like a good soldier, hand over the prize, and wait patiently for the next suicide mission. Matthew smiled behind his helmet, a sharp, cold thing. Not this time. He tapped into the station's communication array, fingers moving rapidly over the cracked console. Lines of encrypted code filled the screen, a flood of hidden transmissions, black ops records, forbidden experiments, and one data packet stamped with High Command's own encryption. They had sent the creatures here. They had made them. And they had left them to die, along with anyone unlucky enough to find them. It was proof. Proof of how dirty the war had become. Proof that Matthew wasn't the only monster they had created. He downloaded everything onto a secondary drive, tucked it carefully inside his armor. Not for command, for leverage, for the future. By the time the retrieval shuttle arrived, the station was little more than a floating tomb. Matthew stood alone on the docking platform, one boot resting casually on the carcass of the last mutated creature he had killed. The automated systems didn't question him. No one came to greet him. No one dared. He boarded silently, and the shuttle peeled away from the shattered station, leaving the wreckage spinning behind them like the broken crown of a fallen king. At Central Command, they tried to put on a good show. A crisp uniform was waiting, medals already prepared, an official announcement ready to broadcast across the sectors. Another successful operation, another nameless hero. But when Matthew Cole stepped off the shuttle and into the debriefing chamber, all of that died in their throats. He looked like a man dragged straight out of hell, blood-smeared armor, rifle slung lazily over his shoulder, eyes dead and cold and sharp enough to cut steel. He handed over the official data cores without ceremony. The officers barely managed to stammer their thanks. And then Matthew smiled. That slow, deliberate, knowing smile. And he said, in that same soft voice that had unnerved Vekthar the first time he heard it, "Before you file your reports, you might want to check what else came back with me." He dropped a small black drive onto the polished steel table. It clattered once, loud in the stunned silence. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the room full of high-ranking officials staring after him like he had just thrown a live grenade at their feet. Vekthar heard about it later, about the internal investigations, the scrambling, desperate cover-ups, the silent disappearances of officers who had been too closely tied to the experiments. Matthew Cole had handed them the rope, and command was now busy hanging itself with it. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't their weapon anymore. He was free. And somewhere out there in the dark corners of the galaxy, Matthew Cole was already moving again, toward the next battlefield, the next corruption, the next broken system that thought it could control him. A ghost, a myth, a warning, a storm wearing a human face, and Vekthar knew, deep down, they would hear his name again. Not from enemies, not from rumors, but from the wreckage he would leave behind, because once you unleash something like Matthew Cole, you can never cage it again.